All right.
Okay.
And then we have some.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you all so much for attending Left Big Books Presents. Minda Harts will be discussing her amazing new book, Right Within, How to Heal from Racial Trauma in the Workplace, an essential self-help read for women of color to heal and thrive in the workplace. Minda will be in conversation with St. Louis author Lecia Michelle, whose book, White Allies Handbook, came out this summer. For all of you here in person, thank you so much for being here. We also thank you for wearing your mask for the duration of the event. It is also our continuing goal to provide hybrid events to allow this programming to be reachable to a wider audience. So for those of you joining us at home, we appreciate your support. You'll be able to participate as well in the audience Q&A by typing your questions as a comment, so I'll be checking on that. So for tonight's event, it is only possible because of all of your support. When you support Left Bank Books, your money goes directly into the local economy. It helps us keep our bookstore open, and it also helps keep your streets paved, your libraries funded, your parks free, and so many other things, making St. Louis a better place. I'd like to thank you all for shopping local and supporting this event. So we are always hard at work at planning events for you all and for readers of all ages. So we encourage you to check out our full event calendar on left-bank.com. Of note, on November 3rd, we're welcoming Sherry Washer to discuss 37 Words, a stellar and moving tribute to Title IX's 50 years of gender equity progress in schools. And on November 10th, we're going to be hosting Alyssa Bassist, who will discuss her journey to reclaim her authentic voice in a media culture that won't listen to women. So, for tonight's event, Minda Harts is the CEO of the Memo LLC, a career development program for women of color. She's also a professor of public service at NYU Wagner. She has been featured on MSNBC's Morning Joe and Fast Company and speaks at Fortune 500 companies, including Microsoft, Levi's, and Google. In 2020, she was named a LinkedIn Top Voice, and in 2018, she was named one of 25 emerging innovators by American Express. She hosts the podcast Secure the Seat and lives in Los Angeles. And again, her new book is Right Within. In workplaces nationwide, women of color need frank talk and honest advice on how to deal with microaggressions, heal from racialized trauma, and find relief from invisible workplace burdens. Filled with her signature wit and warmth, Right Within offers strategies for women of color to speak up during racialized moments, with managers and clients, work through past triggers that may not know cause pain, and reframe past career disappointments as opportunities to grow into a new path. Dr. Ibram X. Kendi describes Minda as writing with care, conviction, and deep insight. And Latasha Brown, co-founder of Black Votes Matter, calls it a moving guide to healing and equity. Harts is a voice to be reckoned with. Everyone needs to read this book. Joining our conversation tonight is Lecia Michelle, a writer, librarian, educator, activist, and founder of Real Talk, Women of Color and Allies for Racial Justice and Anti-Oppression. Lecia Michelle's new book, The White Allies Handbook, is an actionable 4-week program for becoming an ally who makes a real difference in the racial justice fight. She has been a librarian for over 15 years, working in both universities and public libraries. She has a BA in journalism from Eastern Illinois University and a master's of library and information sciences from San Jose State University. So please join me in welcoming both of our guests this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm so happy to meet you.
Likewise.
So happy to meet you. So, well, let's get going because we don't have that much time. Okay, so after your first book, The Memo, why did you feel it necessary to follow up with Right Within?
Yeah, again, thank you for saying yes, for being in conversation with me, and thank you to Left Bank Books for always supporting me, and to all of you for coming in the virtual spaces. So when I wrote The Memo, for those who may not have read that book, it was one of the first books by a major publisher about the experiences of women of color in the workplace, which is crazy to think that that was the first. And it really was based off of me being the only. If you've ever been the only of anything in the workplace, it's very isolating and annoying and all the things, right? So I was suffering in silence. I thought something was wrong with me, right? Still trying to do all the things to try to make Joe or Chad or Jim or whomever see me, and it just wasn't, working, and it was starting to erode my mental health after a while, the way you see yourself. W.E.B. Du Bois talked about in 1903 double consciousness, seeing yourself through the eyes of someone else. I was always seeing myself through the eyes of dominant culture. And that affects and distorts how you move in the world. You can't bring your authentic self to the workplace if you don't know who that is, right? You've been assimilating, if you will. And so for me, I wanted to write about what it's like for Black and brown women, women of color, to lean in, because nobody was having that conversation. It's hard to lean in when you're not even in the room, right? So, so I had to write that. But then I realized, after having a 15-year career in corporate and nonprofit spaces, that I had all of this trauma that I had experienced, but I didn't know how to articulate it. I didn't know what to name it, but I knew that I was experiencing anxiety, depression, all of these things. Anybody ever experienced those things in the workplace? And it was just starting to affect how I show up in other aspects of my life. And I thought, what would it look like to be free? One definition of freedom is the no longer feeling confined. And every day I went to work, I felt confined. I felt like I was in chains. And I wanted us to know what freedom could really feel like with healing from those traumas that we should have never been exposed to from the get-go. So that's why I decided to add to it. So once we talked about what it's like to be us, now what is it like to free us? That's what I wanted to discuss.
Everything that you just said is what I went through in corporate America, so thank you. How do women of color heal from racial trauma in the workplace?
Yeah, first off, shout out to Lauren Hill, because how you gonna win if you ain't right within? I had to wear the sweatshirt today. But you know, this concept of healing, I know it's like really kitschy right now, but healing is messy. Healing is necessary. And so how do we heal? We first have to acknowledge that we've been harmed. I think many of us have normalized the treatment and behavior that we've experienced in the workplace. We just say, oh, that's just Chad being Chad, right? Or this is what we have to deal with being a woman, or a woman of color, or a Black woman, or a person of color, or someone on the margins. That's just what we do. And I wanted to say, well, there's other people who go to work and they never have to experience that, right? They just get to do their job. And so I wanted us to first acknowledge that we've been harmed. For example, I wrote about it in the memo and Right Within, but I had a manager, and for tonight we'll call him Chad. Chad, he saw that I had a burnt orange fingernail polish, and he said, "You people love your bright colors." And he joked around for 15 minutes about how Black people like bright colors. And at the time, I was shocked, right, that he said it, but I didn't know if I could say anything. I didn't know if I should say anything, because we know if we do say something, then we're the problem, which is, you know, crazy to me. But that was the normalization, that it's okay for that type of behavior in the workplace. And so I wanted to say, so I used to tell myself, because he would say things like that all the time, that that's just the way things are, right? That's just, I have to settle into these microaggressions. I have to settle into the racism, the biases. And I never wanted to call it racism. I never wanted to name it. And that was part of the change, right? No, not calling a thing a thing. So part of the healing is first even acknowledging it, if to no one else, but to ourselves. That's part of the freedom. You can't conquer what you can't even confront.
Wow, okay. I want to say that when I was in corporate America, I had someone tell me that he was sure I liked watermelon and fried chicken. So that was my experience in corporate America. It was fine to say it, nothing happened to him anyway. Next question. You mentioned that team meetings, I also had issue with team meetings, were a trigger for you. How can we better understand our own triggers and create safe spaces for ourselves?
Yeah, so during like the latter half of my career in my former life, I mentioned that I started to get panic attacks in certain situations. I get panic attacks when this one particular colleague, when her messages would come into my inbox, because I knew it was going to be some mess, right? Always. Whenever she called me, when I'd be in meetings with her, I would just, sometimes it would get so bad that it almost paralyzed me, that I couldn't even speak. It would affect me in that way. And at first I thought, again, it was just me. What is going wrong with me? I'm going crazy and I don't know why, right? And then I started to dissect and look at the patterns of what's causing it, because I know it's, after I got out of my own head, I'm like, it's the environment, right? But because we're one of few or the only, we are not affirmed in those ways. So we think we're the issue. And so I realized what were my triggers? So in meetings, I noticed that where did I feel that anxiety was team meetings. That's where the most egregious things would be said, right? I was in one meeting one time and the only Black woman in the room, and somebody says, instead of calling me Minda, they say, what does the Black girl think? And then everybody laughs, and then you know how you do the fake laugh because you just want to move the situation on. And so I started to kind of document where these situations were happening so that I could pinpoint. So if I did decide to have a conversation, I'm not saying, oh, I think Gina's being racist today. I could say, no, actually at 12:57 on Monday, this is what was said. And then I've been documenting it so I can actually, this is a pattern of behavior, right? And if we really want to pull back the cover, can I be real tonight?
Yeah.
It's a pattern of abuse.
Right.
And so once I started to kind of pull it back, I'm like, you know what? I'm in an abusive relationship with my workplace. And I didn't want to name that. I didn't want to call it that, but I had to be honest with myself to say, this is not good for me, right? And if I'm harmed in this environment, then how am I showing up when I go home? So yes, Lecia, I'm not an angry Black woman in the workplace, but I might be angry at the house, okay? Because I'm just, I might be tense at the house. Now the people that love me the most, that want the best for me, don't get the best version of me. And I also don't get to meet the best, most healthiest version of myself under all of that stress. And so if we don't heal, our life is at stake.
I just want to kind of follow up a little bit outside of my question. So don't you think, obviously a lot of the issue in particularly corporate America or places where we are so few that look like us, it's the silence. It's the silence during the thing that was said that was egregious. It's the silence afterwards, or it's the afterwards, oh my gosh, I can't believe that someone said that. But they would never say it to their coworkers, never report it to their managers. How harmful is that when you know that the silence is happening and they know that what was said was wrong, but no one is speaking up and no one is saying anything and leaving you on your own to deal with it?
Yeah, and that was part of my healing journey, to be right within. I'm still trying to get right within, okay? But that was part of my journey because our healing is not a one-time event, it's a lifestyle. We have to commit to that thing each and every day. And so what I realized was, because I was the only, I used to find some weird comfort when my colleagues would come after the fact and be like, oh, you're so strong, I can't believe they said that. And then that would let me know that I didn't make that up. Right? I didn't conjure this situation up in my head. But then as I started to unpack things, I'm like, you know what? You're just as much at fault as my manager who said you people love the ring. You're both at fault, right? Because you didn't do anything about it. And so once I started to think about what does good look like to me, then I allowed myself to essentially create boundaries. So I have this thing right within that I talk about called say what you mean without saying it mean. What would it look like if I tell you that this is not okay? So for example, when the situation happens in the meeting or wherever, and one of your colleagues comes to you and says, oh, I can't believe John said that. What I would start to do is say, oh, so you did see that happening. And that was egregious, right? So you know what would be helpful to me next time is if you said something in that moment. That would be helpful to me. That's what active allyship looks like, right? But it doesn't help me. I know you mean well, but the impact of not saying anything participates in the oppression in that moment. And so I had to allow myself to start to have those conversations with my colleagues because they want to help. You're signaling to me that this is not okay. You just don't know what to do. And so now I'm going to tell you what I need you to do in that moment for my sanity, right? Or it's just not helpful for you to keep coming and talking to me about this. And so that gives them something to work with too, right? That it's not okay to just keep coming to us. In Right Within, I dedicate it to Black women who were told that you have to be strong for everybody but yourself. And it's not, we shouldn't have to be strong at every turn. Being strong is not on the job description in the workplace. But humanity, dignity, equity, respect should be, right? And we should have those kind of conversations.
Thank you for that. I love that you asked managers to take a pledge. What is that about? Because I'm very curious about this pledge.
Yeah, so half of Right Within is mostly talking about my journey to attaining healing to being right within, what that looks like, what frameworks I use when I am, even when I'm not able to leave the workplace, because some of us are healing while we're in hell, right? We're still in we're still in some of our workplaces, but for whatever reasons, we're not able to leave those spaces, or school or wherever you might be. And so part of our healing, while we're healing, we also need equity in the workplace. We need our managers and leaders to be better people, right? Oftentimes I get the pleasure of speaking at a lot of companies, and I'll have these closed door conversations with leaders, and I'll have some leaders say, well, I'm not comfortable talking about race in the workplace, or I'm not comfortable calling that person by their preferred pronouns. And I'll say to them, well, then you probably shouldn't be managing anymore, because there's no way you could be equitable and not have these conversations. So what you should be saying is, what tools, what resources do I need? What competencies do I need so that I can allow people the space to be able to do the best work of their career? That managers should not be creating more barriers, they should be removing them. That should be the role of a manager. And so part of the pledge is saying, let's commit to daily acts of equity, even when we get it wrong, because we're all human, right? We're gonna make a mistake. But when we make that mistake, recommitting to equity, right? So part of the pledge is saying, we're no longer allowing managers and leaders to opt into equity. Equity has to be mandatory, point blank, period, right? So if we don't have the right managers, then we need to be cultivating those managers who can manage diverse talent, because going into the next industrial workplace revolution, we can't have incompetent, socially bankrupt, culturally bankrupt managers leading us. It's just impossible. And especially when you have 1.4% of Black women in executive roles, but yet we're the most educated group in the country, that doesn't make any sense to me. So I've never been good at math, but my calculations say that that has something to do with managers, right? Because none of us can promote ourselves. You have to have a manager that's invested in your success, not just the people that look like them. So I want to put the accountability on managers.
And I agree with that. I think that most people who are managing either have pretty much zero accountability in their position to do exactly what you're talking about, or the ones who have tried are getting a lot of pushback from their managers saying, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? You know, don't have that conversation. You know, so, but I do think that most people who are doing what I consider one of the most important jobs ever, which is managing people, are very bad at it. Very bad at it, so.
And that's why training is important. Talking about that. I mean, it's hard to be a manager. It is very hard to manage people, and not all of us have the competencies, but part of having emotional intelligence is saying, hey, I need help with this, right? Because I don't want to harm my team. Even if it's unintentional, I'm still harming people on my team. And if everybody doesn't feel supported, then you're not being a good manager.
And your people leave.
Yeah, that part.
And your people leave.
And they will leave.
Yeah. For a lower paying job, because they're miserable with the higher paying job with you. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Anyway. You mentioned a term called prudent paranoia. What does this look like for women of color in the workplace?
Yeah, when people tell us that, oh, you're taking it the wrong way, or they didn't mean any harm, all the greatest hits that we've all heard on replay. Prudent paranoia is the more you notice, the more you worry. The more you worry, the more you notice. And so many of us are paranoid in the workplace, and we don't even know it. And that's part of the anxiety that we're feeling being in these very toxic workplaces. And so, again, putting a name to things. Many of us never even knew what some of this stuff was called, what we're experiencing. We just know that we're not being treated the same as everybody else, right? And we're not making this up just because no one else is focusing on it. And so, again, I wanted to give space to say that I see you, your experiences matter, and even if dominant culture does not see it, these things are still real, right? And so, again, if we're always paranoid in the workplace and feeling anxious, you can't do the best work of your career under that. Now, we rise to the occasion. I had one of the best years of my career depressed. So somehow I was still, at the top of the charts, but it was killing me inside to experience all these things. But again, I didn't have the language. And now that we could talk about what that language looks like, that's where the freedom comes in. Audre Lorde said, beware of feeling you're not good enough to deserve it. We all deserve that freedom. We all deserve that, but it can't just be me getting free. If we have these conversations out loud, that's part of the freedom, right? Saying, wow, okay, maybe I can't have these conversations tomorrow, but I'm gonna will myself, start to heal myself. And healing first starts in the mind, knowing that we deserve better than many of us have been getting for years.
I wonder how many of us, as Black women in the workplace, brown women in the workplace, have had to go to therapy. I went to therapy when I worked corporate. Have to go to therapy to figure out if it's worth staying because the money's good, or do you just leave at this point? You know, like, I mean, and a lot of us won't even go to therapy, you know, because we don't want to acknowledge that, in fact, we need to go to therapy because of this horrible job and this position that we're in. Have you had discussions with women where they've kind of tried to waffle and not want to go that far because they don't want to acknowledge it's that bad?
Yeah, I think in many communities, we just haven't been educated on the range that therapy offers, right? I think sometimes in the Black community, we make a lot of jokes. I don't know about you all, but, you know, we used to make jokes about so-and-so's not on their meds, or, you know, so-and-so's crazy. And we say these labels, not realizing what we're saying about people, about ourselves. And because we have that stigma around help, thinking that you have to take it on and do it yourself, it leaves us empty. Especially, I think, Black women in particular, because we have to carry so much. So much is on us. The reason why we don't leave a lot of our jobs is because so many people are depending on us. Okay, so we don't have the luxury. So I say it's really important that we have the tools. Who are our healing squad to make sure that we are our healthiest selves, right? So if we do have to stay at this job, or we do have to help family members, who's pouring into us? And so for me, I started going to therapy back in 2008 because I was experiencing things, but I didn't know what it was, right? And I just knew that I needed something. And I believe that you can get healed from the church but with Jesus, but you also can get healed on the couch if you need to, you know? And it's just like a toolbox. I look at it as a healing toolkit. What tools do you have when you need them? Right? Some of us might use a pastor, some of us might use a life coach, some might use meditation or prayer, but making sure that we have something, because our success cannot be a solo sport. Our mental health cannot be a solo sport. And again, when we don't get our healing, then we're passing on tools of survival. That's what many of the tools we're all using is just surviving. Let's just survive this thing. But what would it look to thrive? What would it look to be free? And we can't pass on healing to the next generation if we haven't found freedom ourselves. And so I think it's important to normalize getting help, whatever help might look like for us. And that's, I think, for all women. But first, again, putting ourselves first. I think sometimes we look at it as being selfish, but it's actually being selfless. Again, it's not being your authentic self, it's being your healthiest self. What does your healthiest self look like? And how do you get there, right? And many of us don't know what that is because we've been trying to be help to everybody else. And I think that, and the last thing I'll say, if we don't get the help that we need, whatever that help might look like, Black women in particular, we die at earlier rates than our counterparts due to chronic stress. What do you think that attributes to? You know what I'm saying? So it's really important, you know, I'll be darned if you're taking me out because of a bad manager. Like, we're gonna figure this out, right? You know, I didn't work this hard for Tom to keep oppressing me in the workplace. And at some point, I'm participating in my own oppression by not saying it, by not leaving, by not knowing that I have options. If you get nothing out of what I say tonight, know that you have options. Some of us have gotten advanced degrees in trying to make everything work. You can't make everything work. And part of that is saying, I love myself enough to create this exit strategy and figure out what I need to do to get the heck out of here, right?
I can relate to all of that, yes. You're a big fan of Audre Lorde, I am too, she was a librarian, and you use this quote in your book: "When I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my visions, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid." Why were these words so important to you?
Because we've been taught to value fear over ourselves. fear has held us back in so many places. And I just want us to think about how free we could be if we remove that fear, right? If we show up in the ways that we were created to show up, without the traumas, right? And I used to tell myself in my workplace that I didn't have a voice because I didn't feel like I did. I came into corporate America ready for the world, right? Ready to climb the ladder. And I just felt like pieces of me was chipped away every day. And I didn't recognize myself after a while. Pieces of myself were scattered across my workplace floor. And I thought, I don't want this. I gotta find the pieces of myself that matter to me. I want us to find those pieces that have been chipped away at us, some of our best pieces. And there's a Japanese, thinking about it all, it makes me a little emotional, but kintsugi is a Japanese practice, and it's restoring broken pottery glasses into a new form with gold. And so even though some of us have been chipped away each and every day, we get to redefine what success looks like, looking better, more beautiful, more whole, right? All of this is about being our most whole, healthy self. And so we all have a voice, we just have to decide how we want to use it. And that is why I love that quote by Audre Lorde, because we all have a voice, but we've been silenced in so many ways that we forget that we have one sometimes. And so I want to normalize people hearing what Black women sound like.
I love that. Thank you. That's amazing. What can we do as women of color if we're stuck in a toxic work environment and we can't leave right now? How do we deal with that?
Yes, I have a whole chapter on that because when I cried in my car, I could not quit that day. You know? But
I shouldn't even laugh. I'm like resonating. I'm like, I cried a lot in corporate.
Yes, lashes all on the ground. What I realized was, though, I had been making work for everybody else in the office, but I wasn't making work for me. And what would that look like? So no, I wasn't able to quit when I wanted to. But I started to think about what is it I need to do to make sure that I'm preparing for my next best thing. So even when I was in the pits, I thought, okay, what are some resources that I need? What's going to set me up for whatever I want to do in the future? And I started to think about that. And so I got certifications on my company's dime. I went to the conferences I wanted to go to. I used the development stipends. I took public speaking classes, all of these sorts of things, because I'm like, you know what? I'm going to make it work for me. I started to have some of those conversations that I was scared to have, because I'm like, I'm not going to be here forever. I hope not, Lord. Jesus. But let me start to create boundaries, right? What would that look like, little by little? And a lot of this is just courage, the ability to do something that frightens one. And I said, let me utilize these small acts of courage, right? So I'd start to, when someone did say something crazy to me, I would say, you know, I understand that your intention might not have been to harm me, but what you said, it's harmful. You know, so I appreciate it if you wouldn't do that. Or I used to have coworkers that would always touch my hair. And so eventually I was like, you know what? This upsets me. I'm taking this home with me. I'm mad internally. I'm wondering, why do they keep touching my hair? And I realized, you know what, Minda, you're part of this problem because you haven't had a conversation with them. So I started to have conversations that needed to be had, saying what I mean without saying it mean, right? And then I just started to centering, and that's where I got my confidence back, little by little, making work for me. And that's what I would encourage people to do. What could that look like, right? What would it look like to get what you need out of the situation, right? Asking the manager for the stretch assignments, I took a role that had me out of the office 99.9% of the time. Okay, you know, like what are those things I need to do? And so, and once I was able to do that, I was able to leave on my own terms with all my things that I came for.
Yeah, I went to graduate school when I worked corporate and did my homework at work. And
we were quiet quitting a
I
long
know,
time
and
ago.
graduated, and I think I was gone in 4 days after graduating. I was like, I'm leaving. Yeah, but I will say that, there was some time. I will say that I was so incredibly traumatized for the 10 years I worked at that horrible job. And it really took me a good 5 years past that to kind of understand what really happened And then also give myself permission to be really, really angry about it. Because everyone knew, and I was very outspoken, probably was not the best, I was really outspoken from like the jump about what was going on, and I got blackballed immediately. You know, it was like, well, she's just a problematic worker, and then the anxiety and the panic attacks. And, you know, and I went to grad school, and once I knew that the tunnel was there, I was like, okay, now it can be even worse here. So I can keep saying. So I was just very, very vocal. And when I left, I went to my manager's manager and said, these are the reasons I'm leaving. This is what's been happening. You already know because I've already spoken about it. So do with it what you will. But this is a situation that's been happening, and this is why I will be leaving the organization. Nothing happened, obviously. They went on and they didn't care. But it made me feel better at the time. Yeah, and I will say that now 18 years past that. To hear you talk about your experiences give me flashbacks of what I dealt with, you know, and nobody should have to deal with that. No one should have to be in a place where you cannot be your authentic self, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, the real reason why I wrote Right Within was to say, regardless of if you identify the way I do or not, we all have situations in the workplace that we've experienced, right? Rather, when I recorded the audio version of Right Within, one of the audio men that were one of the sound engineers, he identifies as a LGBTQ man, and he was telling me after listening to me record that he found some healing because when he was in the workplace, he had to hide, right? And he didn't realize how he had normalized some of that stuff, and how a book like this, it just helps us be able to figure out and pinpoint some of the things. My first book was, you know, much more of a funner kind of read, but Right Within is that deep work is for us. And again, healing can be messy, but healing is so necessary, right? When I think about my former self, and if I, you know how those on social media, they have those 10-year challenges. If I look at what was going on with me, I look 10 years younger after, you know, finding some healing, because Dr. King said that racism distorts the personality. It starts to distort how we see ourselves, how we move, how we engage. And it's so important that we heal, we find what healing looks like. I'm not telling you how to heal, I'm not forcing healing on you, but what could healing look like for you, right? I just want us to think about what that could be, because we could be so much happier and freer and enjoy our lives with some boundaries, right? Because we know that some of our colleagues, they have no problem telling us when the copy paper's out, when the coffee's out, you know, like all the things that really hold no real weight. But why don't we give ourselves permission to let people know what good looks like to us, right? Because part of it is, once I told you what good looks like to us, I'm going to assume good intent after I told you. Now, you do it again, that's a different kind of conversation, right? But again, even if someone doesn't mean harm, think about the impact that it has on you, right? Again, two things can be true at the same time. We can be working at the same place and experience the workplace differently. And I think some of our counterparts don't understand that. You know, I used to have colleagues say, oh, so-and-so's not racist. But when was the last time you were a Black woman to experience that? How would you know? You know, like you would never experience it the same way. You know, even when we think about, you know, women in the workplace, many white women, yes, deal with the patriarchy, but they will never have to suit up for racism. It's just something, a battle they'll never have to fight, right? So when we make statements like, so-and-so isn't sexist or so-and-so, if you haven't experienced that, then you're participating in the harm too, right? Because what would it look like for you to be a courageous listener? Hear me out in my experience. Yes, you might not have experienced that with Jeff, but I have, right? So what are we gonna do to remove the barrier? And I think the problem with the workplace is we don't even wanna call a thing a thing.
And I think another part of the problem is white women in the workplace. You know, I had white female managers, I had white male managers in corporate, and it was the same excuses, the same denial, you know, the same kind of toxicity, where once I got labeled somebody who was not gonna just go with the program, every manager I had was told. So when I moved to a different department, they were told ahead of time, oh, you're kidding, Michelle, let me tell you about her. You know, I was a good worker, but you know, it followed me for 10 years. And I think that, yeah, a lot of it is us being able to just stand up and say this thing is happening to us in the workplace. But a lot of the responsibility, I mean, you know, corporate America is mostly upper management is going to be white men, but those middle managers, it's a lot of white women, you know, and they toe that line very hard. They are not going up against their managers. They're saying the exact same things that, you know, I heard from white men that I thought were problematic, or they're saying you took that the wrong way. That's not what they meant. I know them. They're a really good person. You know, so maddening, just so maddening to have someone question my experience.
Right, and that's why it's so important that we have these conversations, so that again, we're normalizing them. But if we never say anything, then whomever gets to create this narrative, right? And that's what's like damning in the workplace, is who gets to create the narrative, right? And I think that's why allyship, or what I write about, success partnership, is so important, because when someone does try to say that Lecia is hard and aggressive and all these labels, they would say, actually, that's not been my experience with her. Right? You know, having that language to step up and say things, and not just letting the narrative run that you're just hard to deal with. And I hope that our allies will step up, right? It takes courage to do that as well. And for me, for any allies out there, watching us online in the room, asking yourself, who's benefiting from your allyship, right? Because many of us call ourselves allies, and I'm not saying white people, we all can be allies. But who's benefiting from you being an ally, right? If nobody's benefiting from you being an ally, can we really call ourselves, right? You know, so if you're an ally for the trans community, how is the trans community benefiting from anything that you're doing, right? Are you giving money? Are you showing up? Or when something's happening in a situation, are you there? You know, so I think we have to think about who is benefiting from our allyship, or just sit down. You know, as my mom used to say, just go sit down somewhere. Because
stop talking.
You're just in the way, right? So I hope, and I'm optimistic, right? Because when many of us entered into the workplace, we used to hear the other greatest hits that don't talk about race, right? Don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion, but yet bring your full self to work. I can't bring Minda to work if I don't bring the Black that carries with me, that I love, right? And so there was a time where we could not talk about race in the workplace, and now we get to talk about it in a way that we never got to before. So while we're able to do that, while that paradigm is shifting, we have to use our voice. Because again, I think about when I sat in the car, the last time I cried at work, I thought about, that was 4 years ago. And I thought, as I was crying, as I was in a very dark place, I said to myself, I thought about all the Black women who came before me, the ones I knew their names, the ones that I didn't. And I thought about courage. I am a beneficiary of their courage. They did things for me that they never even got to experience themselves. I get to experience their courage. And I sat in that car that day and I said, who's going to be a beneficiary of my courage? And I would ask all of us, when we're thinking about, should we say something? Should we do something? Who's benefiting? Who's going to benefit? There's so many people that are going to benefit from us showing up in these spaces and normalizing what good is supposed to look like for everybody. Because I don't want the next generation to inherit the same tears, the same scars that many of us have. I just don't, and they shouldn't, right? And I want us to think about who's going to be a beneficiary of our courage. When we speak up, when we say the thing, that creates space so that the next person doesn't have to say the thing, right? And it's a chain reaction. And I hope that we think about that, because we're so brilliant, we're so beautiful, and we deserve to be able to thrive in the workplace. But it starts with us knowing that we're good enough to deserve it.
I think we have time for questions. We do, we're right on time. We have time for questions.
Or comments or whatever anybody's
Insights, stories, corporate horror stories.
A healing prayer, whatever you got.
Well, my name is Tashana Stansel. I'm the Executive Program Director of Alumni Mentoring at Big Brothers Big Sisters. And Minda, I am so blessed and so grateful to have you in this space, because when I learned about your books, I immediately went to our leadership team. So this is Ms. Erica Sanders. She's our Vice President of Volunteer Recruitment and Community Outreach at Big Brothers Big Sisters, and Kate Dopich, our Chief Mentoring Officer. And Kate is my supervisor, and she was all on board with this work and the things that I was telling her about with your book. And so our leadership team, along with a few what we call staff of color representatives, we actually read that book together, and Kate actually had her managers, who are all white except for me, actually read that book. And we actually implemented your book in our team meetings. And so your book gave staff of color representatives courage to even create what we call our agency's 3 best hopes. And instead of demands that we submitted to Big Brothers Big Sisters of Eastern Missouri, we submitted our hopes for the agency to better our community, the families that we serve. So I'm just in awe, try not to cry, but I am just so grateful to you and you writing this, because all the things that you're saying, I felt like that I literally thought that I was crazy. I literally thought that I was losing my mind. I felt like there was something wrong with me, that I was just doing just the worst of the worst. And like you said, we didn't name it. We didn't talk about it. It was just like, okay, well, something must be wrong with me. But reading your book truly gave me courage to have conversations with my supervisor, who's very supportive. And so when I was able to name it, when we talked about it, we were able to recognize and point out what was happening. And so we started to have conversations. And so now we have our staff of color collective at Big Brothers Big Sisters. We're now having what we call white caucusing at Big Brothers Big Sisters. And so we're talking about healing, because everybody wants to know, okay, well, we've done all these trainings. What's the next step? Well, let's reflect. Let's talk about the things you've actually done that have harmed staff of color and even the families that we've served. Let's name it. And then also let's talk about what that healing looks like. And so we're starting to prepare for cross-racial conversations. And anytime that we're in a team meeting or something, I will whip out your books. I have all 3 of them in my purse, so I hope that you will sign them. I will whip out your book and I will read a passage out of your book real quick to correct someone, to remind folks like, no, this is real. This is not just a Shoshana kind of thing. So I'm just blessed and grateful that you're here, and so grateful for my supervisor and my colleague Eric on the leadership team to be here as well, because we're incorporating all things in your book at Big Brothers Big Sisters. So thank you.
We get that on tape? I love that. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for, I talk a lot about courageous listening. And so when we are talking about that, the ability for our leaders and our colleagues to listen, right? That goes a long way, because now we can actually talk about some things when our defenses are a little down, and they're hard conversations, but necessary. So kudos to you and the team. Thank you so much for sharing.
Any other questions? Yes.
Okay, so my name is Benny. I work in leadership, talent acquisition, and healthcare, and I've been obsessed with your books for forever. But Right Within gave me the courage to leave my last position. And I was just reading it, and I just kept on crying. I had to read it 3 times. I kept crying the first time, and the second time was like, okay, action plan. And then the third time was, okay, it's time to implement this. So in my head, I created everything I need to say. I was able to go to the leaders that I felt harmed me and have those conversations. And then when I put in my notice, the VPs and the CHROs were talking, why are you leaving? You have such great potential. And I told them, I said, you guys need to read this book. Once you read this book, you can circle back and have a conversation. Go home. And I told them, I was like, I am traumatized. I've been abused here, and this is why. And I gave them example after example. And the CHRO, I'm still in good contact with him. He actually read your book, and he called me afterwards. And he cried on the phone with me to let me know that he sees me. And I told him that's great and all, but I wasn't seen before. So I was able to leave. And now I just feel so grateful that you wrote this book, because now I'm in a way better environment where I feel seen and I can show up authentically to work. And for me, I'm only 27, so it's like I needed to get into a better workspace. And I finally have that now, and I can't thank you enough for the words that you wrote in this book.
Thank you so much. Let's clap. So keep that same energy. We're so proud of you.
That was 4 years later, and I came into that horrible job. I left at like 40 something. So I'm amazed at you. I'm so proud of you.
It's not easy. It's not easy.
Any other questions? Yes, in the back, way back there in the back. Yes.
Lashana, thank you. I just want to give Lashana a shout out, because whenever I say I want to come to St. Louis, she's like, say less. So.
2 for 2. I am going to ask something a little controversial, but you've talked about this before, Minda. Lately, I've been listening to a lot of inclusion videos, and the same topic keeps coming up with the comparison of Lean In and how that may have affected women of color when a lot of these Lean In groups, Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In, kind of popped up all over workplaces, and that women of color felt kind of disproportionately pushed aside whenever they were reading and trying to like acclimate to that. And I just kind of want to I know you've talked about it before, but I wanted to get your thoughts and see if anything has evolved since the last time that you've spoken about it.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think we're celebrating, or somebody's celebrating, the like decade long that the book has been out in the world. And for those who may not know, Lean In is still a very popular business book, probably written by a woman, maybe came out in 2013, I believe, and it's still like probably top 10. But it didn't talk about intersectionality, meaning it didn't talk about what it's like for working class women and women of color, Black and brown women, to lean in, and the privilege that Sheryl, being the COO of Facebook at the time, could have to say, I want this and that, right? And so I know when I was in the workplace, our leadership bought the books for everybody to read, and they had these lean in circles, and the leaders of the lean in circles were the ones that were aggressing me, and so I think that for me, it was that book was the catalyst for me to write the books I've written today, is because I didn't see myself in that. And they were calling that the Women's Manifesto. Ain't I a woman?
Come on.
But I didn't see myself in that book. And so Toni Morrison said, write the book you want to read. And that is what I did with the memo. And so I did kind of take Ms. Sandberg to task to say that it's different when we lean in. Like, we don't even get to be in the room. Like, you're at the table telling people what you want. We're trying to figure out how to get in the building still, in many cases. And so I don't know that a lot has changed since that book came out, but I think the conversation has shifted, right? And I think that's important because we're having a much more intentional dialogue than I think we've ever had. So yes, women don't get all the things they need in the workplace, but let's talk about what women we're talking about, right? Even during COVID-19, there's this thing that people like to say, women have been disproportionately affected because of COVID-19. No, let's talk about what women really have been hit the hardest. It's not all women. Actually, white men and women have actually benefited from the wealth gap during COVID-19, whereas Black and Latino women have been hurt the most because of the industries that we were in. You couldn't just work from home when you worked at the hotel industry. You didn't have that opportunity. And so I think what we need to continue to do is say who we're talking about. Let's not make these broad strokes of women. Are we talking about trans women? Are we talking about Black women? Who are we talking about? Because we can't confront something that we're not willing to name, and we can't solve for things ambiguously, right? And I think that's the harm that I think Lean In caused, is just throwing all women one size fits all. And you need different resources, different tools, right? Sometimes different programs, different managers that are going to move equity forward. And so I'm thankful for that book because it lit a fire under me to say, well, what about us, right? But not only that, what are we going to do about it, right? We don't have to wait for somebody else. And the last thing I want to say is sometimes we're waiting for, white people in positions of power because they hold most of the positions, but we can also help ourselves and we can help each other. So let's not forget to say each other's names in the rooms that we're in, because we have power too.
Right, I agree. We have to speak up for ourselves. I was also going to say that I think one of the most common conversations that I have is with white women when they say that they experience the same things that I do as a Black woman. And it's constant. I hear that all the time. Like, there's no comparison, and they will fight you and tell you, but there is, because I understand oppression just like you do. And it's an upsetting conversation because I'm like, you're completely discounting the experiences that Black women have in this country because you want to be oppressed like I am, but you couldn't handle it probably anyway. The stories and the experience and the trauma that we go through. So, I mean, it is a nonstop, ridiculous conversation that I have all the time. And then I end up people just getting really mad at me, but it's okay. That's the person.
Yeah, I mean, all women are oppressed in some way, right? But there are hierarchies of oppression.
We are not at the top of that. Any other questions? Yes, right there.
Not a question, but I just want to thank you for writing your books. You talked about exit strategy, and I was laid off, and well, I was trying to get the exit strategy together. And then in 2019, I realized I'm truly in a toxic work environment. And my manager told me that we got to walk on water to get promoted here. And I'm like, who tells an employee that? So I'm like, okay. Then fast forward 2020, COVID happened. So they're like, oh, layoffs are coming. And then I got laid off. So I was shocked, but I'm very thankful now because that gave me my way out. And now it took me almost a year to find a job. And right now I'm at a good place. I'm ready to read your book because I do know that I need to heal because I worked there for 12 and a half years.
Wow.
And that was traumatic for me. I wish your book was out many years ago, but I'm thankful that you have written that to help people to know that you have to advocate for yourself. And, the cheat code for, getting that seat, to get in the doors. So I'm very thankful for you for writing that and just being brave and bold enough to say it and not be afraid. So I just want to thank you.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad that, and I'm glad that you're in a better space. We deserve that, right? I think about the Black movie Waiting to Exhale for those, and many of us have been waiting to exhale for so long, and once you do, you're like, whew, that feels good, right? And what would it look like for us to be able to have more of those moments, right? And that we created, and self-advocacy is part of self-care. That's part of self-care. And, yes, it's massages and the retreats and things, but our voice is part of the self-care, right? When we silence ourselves, then we're impacting our mental health. Our mental hygiene is so important, right? Just like we brush our teeth or, take a shower, we also have to make sure that we're taking care of our minds. There used to be a commercial, and I might be dating myself, but it said, the mind is a terrible thing to waste. And we really have to make sure that we're filling ourselves up. I talk about having an enemy state of mind versus an empire state of mind. That enemy state of mind will constantly say we don't deserve better, or I'm not going to find better. I've been here, the devil that I know. We tell ourselves these things, but the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves are just as important, right? And so it's important that we do have that empire state of mind. We can make it anywhere, right? But again, creating that boundary in those spaces, and maybe it might take a year to leave, or it may not even be leaving. There's a statistic that over 80% of employees leave a company before having had a conversation with someone. So that means that we might even like the job we're doing, right? But we are fearful, or whatever the reason is, to have the conversation. So I would also encourage you, if you like where you work, but maybe it's the manager, maybe it's the department or something like that, what would it look like to have the conversations that you need to have with those allies, with those people who will hear you out? Because part of it is, for me, that I'm still sometimes healing from, is having that I had to leave my dream job. But the person that was causing the problems, they're still causing problems.
My manager retired, but I still kind of agree and see what he's doing. But he retired like 2 years ago. He's a multimillionaire. I'm 54. He retired at 55. Yeah, I was just like. But I also know he's a miserable human being, so there's that. You have to, in order to treat people the way that he treated me and other people, you couldn't be a happy person. That's not quite how it works. And he was a miserable person. He's still a miserable person. He's a miserable rich person.
Yeah. But it's sad that we always have to be the ones to leave. And what would it look like to have some conversations that we want to have, right? Even if it's just to let people know that this is what's going on, right? Because one of the things that I found about my healing, once I started to realize that my voice does matter, reminding myself that, is that people can't then say, that, again, it's back to this narrative. People want to create a narrative around what it is. Oh, well, this was too hard of an environment for her, or whatever, and they get to say, but if I tell you what's going on and we're documenting these things, then I leave with my narrative, right? No one can say, well, we didn't know that Minda was unhappy, or we didn't know that this was going on. And oftentimes we leave and they get to make up whatever narrative they want to about us, right? And so for me, again, owning our own narrative, having the conversations with whomever I need to have, even if it's just documenting, asking for the exit interview, right? Letting it be documented that that the manager was a problem, right? Because that's the stamp that we leave on places. And so just another way to look at it. And sometimes you just leave and you, like Angela Bassett, you throw the match and you walk away. And that's okay too.
And I agree, but I did an exit interview when I left because I wanted it documented why I was leaving, and I talked to a senior manager and I left. I'm like, do with it what you will, but I knew I had to get that HR interview and let them know. And I did document, so I gave them that and then I left.
It's so important. One of the last job that I had, they hired 3 Black women after me. One left, right? There's a pattern of behavior. And so that's why it's really important that we ask for those exit interviews so that they can go back, run the tape back, bro, and see that this has been a problem for a long, long time, right? And I think that, again, shaping our narratives, you can't call 3 Black women that left angry Black women.
Right.
Okay, you just, okay?
We just weren't a good fit, which I hate that. You're just not a good fit here.
That's harmful language too.
Exactly.
All those things, you're not a good fit, high potentials, who gets to determine who's the high potentials? All of those sorts of things.
Any other questions?
I know we have people online too.
Yeah, I don't know. Can we grab questions from online?
Yes, yeah, we haven't had any in yet. I'm assuming they're typing their really long-winded.
Yes.
I have a question. Can you talk a little bit about what therapy on the couch looks like and how did it, how is it helpful to you?
That's a great question. I have a whole chapter on my therapy. I was actually nervous about writing that chapter, actually, because when I started going, therapy wasn't something that you talk out loud about. I was actually, I had mentioned it to someone that was close to me that I was thinking about going, and they're like, you're not crazy, nothing's wrong with you, those sorts of things. And I felt shame around even thinking about it, or you hear just pray it away, or you're not praying hard enough, or whatever the case may be. And again, 2 things can be true at the same time. I can pray and get different, assistance that I needed. And so for me, I realized at the time that I heard one of my colleagues, one of my white colleagues, they were talking about how they go to therapy every Monday and stuff like that. And I thought, and they were kikiing, just having a great conversation about that. And I'm like, I never hear Black people talking about therapy in that way. And I thought, well, we work at the same place. We have the same insurance, probably. So if you're going to therapy, let me look at what my benefits are, right? And so I looked into my benefits and I started to do my research around what I was looking for. And I even mapped this out in Right Within, but I thought, I'm having these issues with certain people in the workplace. The one thing I know for sure, I don't know if I need a psychoanalyst or a psychotherapist. I wasn't sure what the person was, but I knew that I didn't want to talk to somebody who was white. No offense. I needed to talk to somebody who could understand my experiences. I didn't want to hear, on the couch being told that so-and-so didn't mean any harm. I wanted to unpack that. So that was the one thing that I knew that I wanted was a woman of color therapist. And so I sought that out. And it took me a while to, once I found out that my employer had employee assistance, and we got 3 free therapy sessions. And so, we're good at self-diagnosing. And so I said, all I need is 3. And I ended up going for 7 years. All those 3 turned into more. But it was just about having a soft place to land. I was always being strong. I'm the oldest of 3 kids. You have that demeanor, take control. And sometimes not everybody is asking if you're okay, because you always appear to be okay and put together, right? And so, not to say that I didn't have other soft places to land, but that was my time. That was my space, right? No one could tell me what I thought was wrong or whatever the case may be. And for me, I still have that safe place to land. And I feel like as Black women in particular, we need soft places to land. And so for me, some days we just stared at each other, right? Some days 50 minutes felt like 10 years, right? Sometimes it was ugly, it was crying, we talked about certain things, we strategized, but for me, it was just that other tool in the toolkit. And being able to have a place where someone sees me. And sometimes we don't always have that place. And for a long time in my workplace, I didn't have that place. And I needed that space. And so one of the chapters that I also write about is maintenance. You may feel healed, you may feel like you're in the right spaces, but that maintenance is so important too. So what tools do you need to continue healing, right? Because we know that you could be enjoying a great chicken sandwich and then be bam, kapow, and then racism comes in out of the blue, right? You just don't know, and it can totally like swipe you off your healing journey. So for me, the maintenance is so important. And if you feel like, for me, after being in a toxic relationship for 15 years, I need soft places to land, right? And I hope you will find those soft places to land. It may not be therapy. I haven't had the same therapist since 2008. I've had male therapists. I've had women that look like me, women that don't look like me. And it gives you different perspectives. And I like that too. And so again, it's just who's on your squad, right? Part of my squad is, yes, my pastor. I need the prayers too. But I also need the place where we can get grimy and we can talk about those things. And the last thing I'll say is that for those who think that therapy is not for you, maybe trying it, right? Or maybe you had an experience where it was not the right therapist, just like you go to a restaurant. You might not have liked that food, but you're not going to say, I'm never going out to eat again, normally, right? Figure out what it is you need and find that right healing advisor so that you have someone on your team when you need that support.
Exactly.
We do have a question from the audience now. I shamed them into it. So from Gabe, we have, if you're afraid to address an issue at your job, what is the first step?
It's a great question, Gabe, which is my brother. Thank you.
I did see the last name. I just left that out.
I'm glad you're watching. So I have something in the book called the affirmation pyramid, and it's a 5-step process. And one of the things that if you do have an issue in the workplace, number one is if it's happening right away, we can pause, right? We don't have to respond in the moment if we don't need to, but taking that breath. Number two is acknowledging it. I think, again, I've said it before, but sometimes we won't even acknowledge that this is harm. We won't even call it that, right? Again, you may not say it to your manager, you might not go to HR, but have you acknowledged it to yourself, right? If you have a teacher that's constantly calling you by the wrong name or whatever the case may be, I'm acknowledging that this is harmful to me. And that's the first step. Number three, I'm documenting it. Is it a one-time thing that's happened? Because let's be honest, sometimes some people make mistakes and it's not a pattern, right? It's that one time. So there is space and grace. But now I'm documenting it because I'm noticing that something might be going on here. What kind of conversation do I need to have at some point in time? And so I pretty much document everything because you never know when you'll need that receipt. But then it allows you to base the conversation that you want to have in fact. Again, I think sometimes we get deemed as people of color or anyone on the margins as, oh, I felt like so-and-so was doing something. No, be very clear about what they were doing and who was doing it, right? So we have the facts. So there's no ambiguity of what we're talking about here. And then you can't say that I've made something up. I'm telling you this. So when you're having a conversation, root it in the facts. And the other thing about documenting, even if you never tell anybody else, that's for you. Because how many times will we question what we know is true? And so you can go back and review and say, you know what? No, I didn't make that up in the last meeting. Oh, that actually you've been sending 10 emails with that same tone, right? And I'm going back to pinpoint it. The next thing is redistribute the energy, because one of the things that I used to do, which was causing me chronic stress, was I'd replay the scenario over and over and over again. like a Beyonce song. I just play it and play it and play it and play it, and it was breaking my soul. You know, because when somebody does something to you or says something, then we tend to ruminate on it. And we start to ask ourselves, well, why did they say that? Why did they do that? And then we take it to the next meeting and we're still thinking about it. And they're taking up space in our body and it's creating chronic stress. Many of us are working from home. You go from your desk to the kitchen, you're making the dinner and you're still thinking about what that person said to you. And guess what? They've moved on. They're watching Tinder Swindler, they're watching football. They're not thinking about you anymore, right? They're not, they moved on, but yet I'm still thinking about you while I'm in the bed, you know? So redistribute the energy. Is it working out? Is it eating healthy? Like, don't take that person's baggage with you. We don't pick up bags, we drop them off. That's that person's bag. And the last part is affirm yourself. Sometimes we won't have an ally in the room or a leader in the room that's gonna affirm you. So what is it that you need to pour back into yourself to let you know that you didn't deserve that treatment, that there's nothing that you did wrong, that you deserve humanity, dignity, equity, and respect. And sometimes we have to be the person to affirm ourselves. There's a gospel song that I love that I listen to when I'm having hard days by Donald Lawrence that says, encourage yourself. Sometimes you have to encourage yourself and remind yourself of those things. And so our voices are so powerful, right? We can be, in the Buddhist culture, they believe in healing yourself. And part of healing ourselves is making sure that we're putting the goodness back into it when we're in these toxic environments. So there's so many frameworks in Right Within. And, I just hope that people will choose healing and freedom because it feels good on this side.
Hi, Minda. I just want to say thank you again for writing your books. I've shared it with so many people and should have started a book club, but I didn't. But my question is, I work in compensation and 100% of the time, I'm the only Black female on the team. And when I joined this particular company, I was so excited because my leader looked like me. I set up a meeting, meet and greet, like I do with most leaders. And yeah. So I did a few skip levels and someone got upset and bothered by that. And she found out that I had a meeting and asked me, next time you have a conversation with her, let me know. Mm-hmm. So I had another conversation with the leader and I shared with her, I'm supposed to let so-and-so know when I talk to you. And she confirmed and affirmed with me that, no, you don't. No control is here. This is what you and I have set up, and so you have the ability to do that. So I just wanted to kind of bring that full circle to say sometimes I feel like people want to know more, and I'm such a private person. They want to go out to dinner and ask questions. How, I find like, let me share with them what I want them to know, but I still have a hard time sharing with them that information. So what advice can you give with any of that?
Well, thank you for that. And I'm glad that you had the conversation that you needed to, because part of being right within is also having conversations with people who look like us, right? Whoever's being harmful in the workplace, it's not a color or a identity. If people are toxic, they're toxic, right? Period. And so we need to use the same frameworks with people that look like us too, or other people of color. But the one thing that I would say is, one of the things that I noticed when I was in my former life, when I was working really hard with my head down, because that's what many of us do, and we don't want to go to the happy hours, we don't want to kiki with folks because we've had enough for the day. But when I looked at who was getting promoted, when I looked at those sorts of things, it was people who built relationships with other people. So yes, Carl wasn't better than me on paper, but he went to the happy hours, right? He went golfing. He did the things that I wasn't doing. And what I realized was I don't have to tell all my business like Carl, but what are the things that I'm comfortable sharing, right? How can I let people in for me? Because once I started to go to some of those things, I still didn't share a lot, but because they saw me at the karaoke, they thought they knew me and now we're friends, right? But you don't really know much more about me. Just now you see my face and now I'm friendly. Right? Because I'm in these spaces that we're in. So I think especially as people of color, as Black women, allowing people in just a little, right? Because we have so many different identities. And I know sometimes even on our faces, we carry certain things on our faces even, right? And it can be intimidating to people, not saying that we are, but I think it would benefit us to allow people in just a little, but you determine what the boundary is, right? I don't want to be too chummy where you're asking me if this is my real hair or not. Let's but we both like to knit, okay? Cool. You know, let's go to the fire festival together. You know, like we get to create the space that we want, and I think that we do have to let people in just a little because workplaces work because of relationships. And I think some of us don't get as far as we can, not because we're not good enough, but because we don't have the relationships. So if you have somebody at that skip level, what are the things, right? That you could be like building those relationships. And that's part of our internal branding, right? The more we build out relationships in the workplace, then people know us. So when we are in spaces, people can say, oh no, Minda's not like that,
Right.
because they know me.
Right.
Right? But a lot of time, our allies or people that we've been working with don't say anything because they don't know us.
Right.
You know, I mean, that's not our issue, right? But because we haven't felt safe all the time to show up in those ways too. But what does safety look like to you? So giving that little, you don't have to tell where you were born and the time and what your sign is if you don't want to, but what are the things that you could start to kind of let people in a little? And I started to do that with little things, right? I'm a very private person, but I write in my books, and a lot of people feel like they know me, like we're best friends after the book, but there's still a private side of me, right? I give just enough that I need to give to create that space so that we do feel like we're hanging out on my couch on a Friday night, but you've never really been to my house, right? So you're keeping that energy, right? I hope that was helpful.
Yes. Other questions? Okay. Yes.
We are a little bit over time. We're just going to do one more if that's
Okay.
okay with you all from the virtual audience. So it might be one that you've touched on a little bit, but I'll at least read the comment part. Reese says, first, love you, Minda. Love your voice, your work, tremendous blessing. And then secondly, what would you recommend the very first step towards self-advocacy in the workplace should look like?
Yes, thank you, Reese. All my people are in the virtual space. You know, self-advocacy, I think we have to think about what that looks like for us, right? First, we have to figure out, first of all, you need to know that you are your best advocate. Nobody can advocate the way you can because you know what you're working on, right? Even if your manager sees you doing all the things, they're not paying attention all the time to those things, right? So one of the things I would say is write down your wins, no matter how big or small they are, whatever those things are that you started a book club, let people know that, right? You've taken on a leadership role. When certain things are coming up or say what you're working on, I used to be in the elevator with our second most senior person on the floor we worked with. And when I used to see Steve, he would say, Minda, how you doing? And because I wasn't comfortable like having conversations and advocating for myself, when he'd ask me that question, I'd say, oh, I'm good. And I'd keep staring at the elevator doors or whatever I was doing and keep put my head down. And eventually I thought, everybody is not getting this time with Steve. I get to see him, and a lot of hundreds of people that I work with never get this time. So I started to think, how can I maximize this space when I see him? And so then when he'd ask me, Minda, how are you doing? I'd say, I'm doing really great, Steve, and I've been working on this really great project in Silicon Valley, X, Y, and Z. And every time I would see him, I would add just a little bit, right? And eventually, months later down the road, something came up where he thought about the conversations that we had, and he said my name in a room that I wasn't in, and I got a promotion months later, right? But utilizing those opportunities to advocate for ourselves, no matter how big or small they are, because again, nobody's going to advocate the way you can. And I think the other part of the stigma is we think self-advocacy is bragging. No, it's not bragging, it's self-advocacy. You know, and I think if we take that stigma away from bragging and we advocate for ourselves, then we can move a little bit different. But people do it all day, right? So find what your finesse is to that. But people can't help you, they can't promote you, they can't say your name in the room if they don't know what you're doing. And so that's part of what we have control over. I often think about what part of the equation do I have control over? And that's the part I needed to.
Let's thank both of our guests one more time. Thank you all so much as well for being here. So we have books available. We have Right Within, we have You Are More Than Magic. We have White Allies Handbook, all available at the front desk. We're also going to be doing a signing line here. If you're interested in getting your book signed. For those of you online, it's not too late to place an online order. If you want your book signed and personalized, leave a note in your order there. We can personalize those as well. Otherwise, we'll have signed copies for sale in the store following the event. So thank you all so much and have a great and safe night. Oh, that's on Memo. That's in there too.